Let's talk a little bit about what happens when you need to replace a little piece of pearl or inlay on a Hardanger fiddle. Now, this isn't a Hardanger fiddle fingerboard. This is a Nordic fiddle that just has a little simple inlay that I'm working on, and one of the pieces came out. You can see right here and right here. So something that is quite possible to happen on your Hardanger fiddles. Some of the most common inlay materials that you'll see, probably the most common, will be just a mother of pearl. And the second most common you'll see is bone, different types of bone. You might also see abalone. This is also relevant for guitars as well, and mandolins, any stringed instrument that has inlay. And so some more exotic types of inlay material: black pearl, gold pearl. This is nickel silver, Dix gold, and then these are all reconstituted stone. So different types of inlay options. And so the first thing that you'll have to do is decide what is missing. Again, on Hardanger fiddles, it's going to be pretty straightforward. It's most likely going to be pearl or bone, sometimes abalone. On this particular one, it's got this one's got the Dix gold, or the new gold, and then some nickel silver. Now, these types of materials are actually a little bit different to work with. Because they're metals, they heat up a lot differently. So as I was sanding this inlay, I think what happened is they expanded and stressed that joint and ended up popping out. So got to be really careful with sanding. In fact, with metal, I'm going to avoid sanding in the future and just use files, except for maybe some light 320 grit passes, and then obviously polishing up metal inlay. You'll really need to polish up successive grits of micro mesh. Anyway, so this example will be with these metals, probably the toughest material. Pearl is also a tough material just because it's really brittle. You can get most of these at guitar suppliers. So if you're regularly working on violins and any of this is kind of unfamiliar, there's a lot of resources on this type of thing with in the guitar world. So this is how I've come up with replacing a missing piece of pearl. The first thing that we need to do is figure out the shape that we're going to be cutting out, cut out the shape, re-glue it in, and then shape it down. To transfer the shape, there's this great tape that I love. It's called frog tape, delicate painter's tape. It's usually yellow. It's much thinner than regular painter's tape. And it's the adhesive will not have as many problems pulling off, say, varnish or something like that. I guess, first of all, if you need to remove a piece of inlay, a couple options. You can get a soldering tip and hold that against the piece. Maybe drill a couple holes, chip it out. But most of what you're going to see is a piece that's already come out. All right, so we're going to take this painter's tape, frog tape, delicate frog tape, and put it over the spot that we're trying to get a reading of. Then we'll just do a pencil rubbing. This is 8B pencil lead. I like it. It's softer. It's more lead, less clay. But you probably would be fine using just a regular pencil. You want to make sure that you press nice and hard on that. This tape's also nice, as you can see. It's a little transparent. So at this point, we just take a rubbing. Of the missing piece. Just like that. We can take that piece of tape now. Got a good rubbing of the piece. Now, one thing that you'll want to pay attention to is, as it's really apparent with this black pearl, as you twist it, it has different ways that it shines. And so if you're replacing a piece of pearl, you'll want to take a look at your piece and find the right type of piece, the one that has the right shadows. Typically, if it's just a geometric design, you don't need to worry too much about that, but it is something to be aware of, the direction that you put the piece in. If you put it in like this versus like this, it'll look different from different angles. All right, we're going to go ahead and this we don't have to worry about that, that aspect. So we're going to lay that down. And then one thing that helps, because this is, it'll smudge as we're cutting it out, I just take a little bit of super glue and put a little coat of thin super glue over the top. That keeps our line from smudging, keeps it so we can see really clearly what exactly we're doing. Okay. Got that. I'll go ahead and get this other piece that's going to be on, oh, there we go, on the nickel silver. Same process. Sometimes if it's a really geometric shape, you know, triangles or teardrops, you can also use a thin piece of plastic. Let's see if I've got one. Yeah. So you can use, this is just old overhead transparencies. You can maybe get on here if it's a simpler shape and just draw it on. But any more complex shape, far easier to do the frog tape rubbing. So again, pretty straightforward, just get a rubbing of that piece that we're replacing. Transfer then to our piece of metal that we will be cutting out. And then a little coating of super glue to keep from smudging our lines. Okay, we'll take this over and go get it cut out now. Real quick before I cut this out, I have this thin plywood also. This is probably more important for pearl or something that's really chippy, but it helps here as well. So just kind of gluing on a backer. So we'll go ahead and add a dab of super glue just to temporarily glue on a backer that will help prevent chip out of the piece. Again, this metal probably doesn't need it, but a piece of pearl, it would be really useful. So I'll go ahead and do that on both of these pieces. Super glue accelerator is also a really handy thing to use. All right, now we'll go and get it cut out. Okay, here's my setup for cutting out inlay pieces. First of all, just a little crow's foot that I put in my vise and I can use to cut out. Put a little couple slots in there just so that when I finish with a piece, I have a place to put it. Always make sure the floor is swept underneath in case you drop a piece. In fact, I better go do that before I start cutting. I have just a little air blower with some tube that comes and blows off the dust as I'm sawing. Really important, especially with pearl, to wear a mask so that doesn't get into your lungs. With fine pieces, I find it gets, and I'll likely use it with this one, important to get some vice grips that I can hold onto the piece with. And then just a jeweler's saw, a simple frame saw, and blades to go with it. So again, this stuff is all maybe a little unfamiliar to those in the violin world, but really familiar to those in maybe guitar or mandolin and others that do inlay pretty frequently. So let me get this swept up and then we'll get started. Okay, I have my 2 pieces that I cut out, and they'll go right in there and there. And they don't fit perfectly, and that's actually okay. And that's kind of the great secret of inlay that we'll talk about. I do want to just kind of smooth these edges off a little bit. So this is where these vice grips are really useful to hold. Just grab those, and then just some files. Smooth these edges. If there's something that I have a hard time getting a file into, I guess I'll show that in just a second. But using this Dremel with the flex shaft, let's use one of these rounded ones. I'm not really shaping these, I'm just kind of smoothing the saw marks off of them. So yeah, this stage, it's really useful to have these vice grips. I didn't end up needing them for cutting them out, but if I did, I would just lock it in like this and run my saw along like that. So that piece is probably pretty good, yeah. I still have the tape there on top just to kind of keep it oriented. Not a super big deal, but yeah, might as well. At least in this case, sometimes the orientation is really important, especially if you cut a piece of pearl that was specific for how it captured the light, or if you're using recon stone or abalone or something where you did selective pearl choice, then you'll definitely want to keep it in the right orientation. So just kind of smoothing off these saw marks. Here on these internal faces, I find it really convenient to use just this Dremel with a flex shaft with a really pointy carbide bit. So let me do that real quick. Oh, it would help to have it plugged in. Okay, Dremel is one of the most versatile tools for inlay. Okay, so now I've got these ready. They don't quite fit, and so here's the great secret about inlay. I'll get the tools all set up in a minute, but you actually don't want really snug fits. The reason for that is you've got different materials, different thermal expansion coefficients and so forth. So as it goes through humidity and temperature fluctuations, the materials are going to grow and shrink in different directions at different rates. And so it's actually important to have a little bit of a buffer between them, a slightly malleable buffer. So what I'll do is I'll actually grab my Dremel in the base and route out a little bit more. And you can honestly be as careful or as uncareful as you want. I tend to be a lot more careful, but you'll end up filling all the gaps with colored epoxy, and we'll go over that step in a minute. Now, some people use super glue and get along fine with it. I've had bad luck with super glue staying. Super glue is pretty brittle, and so any impact will kind of jostle those pieces loose, and that's really important, especially on the edge of the instrument where it's where you don't have wood surrounding all 4 sides. You only have wood on 3 sides. So I don't recommend super glue. They do make colored super glues and colored epoxies. I'll show you what I use. You know, in the end, they'll probably all work fine, but this is This is the system that I use, and it works really well. So let me get that set up and I'll show you. Okay, I've got my Dremel set up, and I'll talk about my setup here. One thing that is important to talk about is a lot of these inlay patterns are typically pretty geometric, which means there is kind of black space between each component of the inlay. And that's important for doing this. Now, if you had a really specific piece of inlay that went right up against some other pieces, you would want to be a lot more careful about cutting that out and getting an exact fit, shaping it to probably with that little flex shaft and so forth to the exact slot that is missing. But most of the time you're going to have some fill space in between. So this is where we want to create the slot that these are going to go into. Now, you're not likely to have the setup that I have unless you do a lot of inlay, and it might be expensive if this is a one-off job. So if that's the case, use your purfling tools, your knives. A single bevel knife is really good, and kind of just dig out that channel so that it fits. These pieces fit nice, pretty close to flush with the top. What I've got here is this plunge router base that goes, you'll see I'll set the depth here, and then you can plunge in and then tighten these knobs, and that's how deep you end up going. This is really nice, but again, something you probably only have if you do a lot of inlay. This is an upcut spiral bit, and also, again, just my air blower that will get rid of the dust, the sawdust. So let me go ahead and set that. So put it to where this is flush with the surface of the base, and then have this little knob that adjusts right there. So I put my piece in. Perfect. And that's how deep I want to go. Have my light ready to go. Not quite ready. Let me get my fingerboard holder. I made an adjustable one because Hardanger fiddles are all a little bit different. This is just a regular violin fingerboard. And ideally this would clamp into my vise, but I'm not gonna move everything over just for that. This should hold just fine. Okay, make sure these fit. That one will need a little bit more coming out, so actually it's probably good, but it doesn't hurt to just kind of scribe along there. And this one will also need just a little bit. If these get stuck in there, you can always just grab a little roll of painter's tape, unroll it, stick it. Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. All right, I'll get set up for the last little bit. Okay, the last step is to actually glue in these missing inlay pieces. Now, I talked about, I personally don't like super glue. It's too brittle. A small little jolt can jolt these pieces out of place. I've just had a lot more success with epoxy. You can use any epoxy you want, and it's probably going to be better than super glue. And they do make some black epoxies as well. Since you're filling these gaps, you're going to want it to be the same color as the background wood. So the way that I do that, and this is just what I do, I use this System 3 G2 epoxy specifically because it's good for oily hardwoods. Now it's something that you use on, I discovered from bow work, and that's really important for Pernambuco. So hopefully you have some around if you do bow work. If not, it's still just a really good epoxy for inlays as well, because we do use a lot of oily hardwoods. And so, but I've used plenty of other epoxies as well, and haven't had any issues with them. As far as getting the background color, the most reliable way is going to be sawdust, and because that'll match pretty closely the exact color that, especially if you get sawdust from the board that you're doing. If you're using some other type of wood as the background, you'll definitely want to just get sawdust off of that. I don't think it's worth color matching. With ebony though, I don't like sawdust because it's pretty gritty. You know, these look small, but in small spaces they end up being a little bit bigger. I've used India ink in the past. That affects the viscosity of the epoxy, but it cures fine. So just a drop of India ink. My latest though is I use the lamp black pigment, or just any black artist grade dry pigment. And I'm really happy with that. It kind of keeps the same consistency. It's extremely fine, and so it doesn't get clumpy. It doesn't affect the viscosity. So the only hard thing about the G2, you can read the directions, but it's a 1:2 by volume ratio. Usually I'm doing such small amounts that I find it's much easier to do it by weight. And so, so I just put a little bit of part A on, 0.17. Oh, here I'm going to need to grab my calculator. It's a 1 to 0.44 right here when you're doing it by weight. And so I'll just do real quick the calculation, 0.21 grams times 0.44. Real quick, the last thing that I like about this, especially if you're doing a big inlay glue up, it has a really long dry time, or a really long working time. Yeah, 1.5 hours. And so with the 5-minute cure epoxy, I have to mix up multiple little batches. This is really convenient to just do one batch. So, and it's made right here in Washington. All right, so let me grab my calculator real quick. Okay, I'm looking for 0.09 grams of part B. And if I overshoot, I just calculate what I need to add. Well, clearly not the most sensitive scale. Yeah, you know, we'll call that good. And then just a little bit of the lamp black pigment. This is just an old sticker backer, really convenient thing to mix small amounts of epoxy on. There might be other pigments that are more ebony colored, but you know, this is what I used for these other pieces, and it seems to be just fine. Okay, and just put a little bit in. Fill those up. This will cover a multitude of sins, where if your bottom isn't quite level or your sides, I mean, I always advocate for clean work, and do my best, but this makes it really forgiving if this is a new skill for you. Okay, as you can see, it doesn't take very much. And just put these in. Now it's gonna need to dry overnight. So yeah, and then I'll fill just a little bit, make sure, work some of this epoxy in there. Now, if there's still gaps, that's where I'll use some super glue. It's much quicker. So as I'm doing the final work, and I'll fill any little micro cracks with super glue. Okay, but yeah, that's going to turn out great. So yeah, a lot of different tools, new tools. Typically what I would charge for this work, 30 to 45 minutes for each piece. And if you've never done inlay before, though, I would probably do it at least an hour and a half to 2 hours. Another option, maybe you have a guitar friend that has worked with inlay more and has the tools, outsource it to them. I guess you're probably looking at this and saying that's not completed. So yeah, once this is done, take the file and shape it, and then I have another video on dressing a fingerboard. And so I guess I just, rather than waiting to finish videoing this, I'll refer you to that video for the final steps of getting this smooth. Again, just make sure you're using, especially when it's metal pieces, a file is going to be much better than the sandpaper that'll cause it to heat up. Learned that the hard way, as you can see. And then, yeah, especially you'll want to work through those micro mesh grids and really polish it up. You'll see micro scratches on metal inlay much more than any other type of material. Anyway, that's how you replace some missing pieces of pearl inlay, and hope this is really helpful and helps you to preserve these beautiful works of art.